may not yet be over. We do know at this time that at least 4 targets have been attacked. The 2 Twin Trade Tower centers here in New York City, the Pentagon, and then another plane that was crashed deliberately into an area outside of Pittsburgh. That is the second plane hitting the Twin Trade Towers this morning, all of them hijacked airliners. Then these 2 colossal icons of the American capitalist system collapsed in lower Manhattan. The death toll at this hour is unknown, but it is expected to be, as Mayor Giuliani has said, horrendous. Shortly after those attacks on the Twin Trade Towers in New York City, at the Pentagon, in one of the outer rings, another hijacked airliner crashed into 2 areas there, killing an untold number of U.S. military personnel in Washington, D.C. A code red was put in effect in the nation's capital. The White House, State Department, CIA evacuated along with the Pentagon. House Speaker Dennis Hastert was evacuated to a secure area. President Bush, who was in Florida for an appearance for an education project, was evacuated to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where we do expect to hear from him before too long. The United States is, in effect, in a national state of emergency. All domestic flights were grounded immediately. Most flights that were already in the air, we believe, will arrive safely at their destinations. The borders between the United States and Canada and the United States and Mexico have been closed. Transatlantic flights were diverted to Canada. U.S. military forces in this country and around the world have been put on the highest possible alert. Aircraft carriers were moved to waters off New York City as this scene played out in the nerve center of this country, lower Manhattan, the financial markets, an area that is home to literally hundreds of thousands of people. They are still dealing with the carnage in lower Manhattan. We want to go now to NBC's David Bloom, who is in Midtown Manhattan, overlooking all of this. As you can see there, communications have been severely interrupted. David?
Well, Tom, what we're looking at behind us more than 4 hours after the first explosion is the smoking hulk of the essentially vanished World Trade Center. As you've said, the essential question at this hour in New York City is how many people may have died in these attacks. The various officials here in New York City believe that the casualty estimates will essentially go into the thousands and thousands of people. Here is the sequence of events as they happened at this hour. The first plane attacks the World Trade Center's South Tower at approximately 8:42 Eastern Time. Airline officials say at least 2 American Airlines flights and 2 United Airlines flights were hijacked today, and that the attack planes were the hijacked domestic flights. Roughly 21 minutes later, approximately 9:03 Eastern Time, the second large jetliner can be seen taking dead aim at the World Trade Center's North Tower. Emergency officials estimate 20,000 or more people may have been inside the 2 110-story buildings at the time of the attacks. Eyewitnesses report victims falling and in some cases jumping from the 2 buildings. At approximately 9:40 a.m. in Washington, D.C., a third hijacked plane crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames, one side of the building collapsing. Non-essential personnel from federal buildings, including the White House and the U.S. Capitol, are evacuated. 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. An unknown number of people still trapped inside. 1/2 hour later, at approximately 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Rubble, debris spreading for blocks. In a separate but apparently related crash, a fourth hijacked plane, a Boeing 767, crashes in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The FAA closes all domestic airports, shutting down all U.S. airspace. So again, Tom, 4 hijacked airplanes. We know what happened to each of the 4. Other officials investigating now, both apparently the worst terrorist attack in the mainland United States ever. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's David Bloom. What we don't know is who may be responsible for these attacks. There's a lot of speculation, obviously, about Osama bin Laden, who is the Saudi dissident who is believed to be harbored somewhere in Afghanistan, but no one is claiming responsibility. In the West Bank, however, The Palestinians in the streets are cheering and celebrating these attacks on the United States, even though Palestinian leaders have condemned the attacks. We want to go now to NBC's Pat Dawson, who is down near the World Trade Center, because the big question, obviously, in New York City and across this country, how many people have been able to survive this horrendous attack? Pat?
Tom, right now, hundreds of rescue workers are massed here on the southern tip of New York in Manhattan Island, waiting for a possibility where they can go back in large numbers to begin searching through the debris. Obviously, the first task at hand will be to find anyone who is still alive in there. There really is no precedent for this. Two 110-story buildings. First of all, the impact of those two planes into them, and then the buildings themselves literally tumbling down into the streets. It's the sort of thing that one assumes very few people could have survived. But the task of those rescue workers, and if you look behind me, you can see many of them massed down there. The task will be for them to go back in and to try to find anyone who is alive. First of all, that is, of course, the priority. They know. We have spoken to a number of them. Of course, common sense tells us as well they are going to find a very, very high number of dead bodies in there as well. No way. We have spoken to officials here with the police department and with fire. They all say the same thing. This kind of a catastrophe, there's no way of knowing how many people that they're going to find in there, how many people are dead, how many people are alive. There's really no way to know how difficult their task is going to be, going in there and trying to dig through the remains of two 110-story buildings that are now lying at the bottom of Manhattan. Obviously, taking care of those that are hurt, that they have been able to get out, is a first priority. There are literally, I would say, probably a mile-long line of ambulances and rescue vehicles along this stretch of the West Side Highway in the lower part of Manhattan. Just on the right here is a community college in New York. That college is the triage center for those they've been able to take out. But I can tell you at this point that at least from this vantage point where we have seen most people going in and out, there have been, relatively speaking, very few ambulances going out of here in the last 3 to 4 hours. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, Pat Dawson. One of my colleagues who is right in the middle of the collapse of those buildings is CNBC's Ron Insana, who went down with a cameraman hoping to get close to the World Trade Center, and then it began to come down, the first one. Ron, take us through what you experienced.
Well, Tom, much of the area had been, in fact, cordoned off, and the cameraman from MSNBC and I were trying to get across to the west side of the World Trade Center in order to hook up with the rest of the NBC crews that we knew were there. As we were moving towards the building, we saw the top begin to blow out in a plume of smoke, and we heard the noise associated with an implosion. We turned and immediately ran for cover in the other direction as debris began to rain down. As we made our way, John going straight down the street, I taking a right turn around a corner, it got increasingly dark. The skies blackened as the material just continued to rain down. I hid briefly behind a car, and as the material got thicker and thicker and it became increasingly difficult to breathe, I got inside a parked car, a random parked car, and hid there basically until the material stopped falling. It was pitch black, black as night inside that car, and for several minutes I remained there until some flickers of light were able to be seen. I made my way to a building and joined some police officers who were inside, and as the blackness began to lift and this gray, thick smoke clung in the air, we were able to find a police car and make our way out of the area. The policeman stopping along the way to pick up 2 injured people and leave them at a Midtown hospital, and subsequently made my way here.
What about collateral damage to other buildings in the area? Those, of course, are the classic canyons of lower Manhattan, and as that building came down, it did create a kind of tornadic wind that went through there.
Absolutely, much like the images that were created for the movie Independence Day, when New York was exploding. The corridors of lower Manhattan are so narrow and channel so much wind, even just on a plain windy day, that this material blew through in a way that was really unimaginable. It was truly frightening. It continued to rain down for several minutes, as you can see there, and the winds just whipped through these corridors for several minutes, eventually calming down to such an extent where there was just a thick gray haze throughout the entire area, Tom.
All right, thanks very much, CNBC's Ron Insana, who was right in the middle of it all today. New York City effectively has been shut down. All tunnels in and out of the city have been closed for security reasons. The airports are closed. The subways are closed. Traffic has been removed from the streets. All hospitals are on extra alert. One right kind of in the middle of it all at ground zero is St. Vincent's Hospital. And NBC's Robert Bazell is there as he has been all morning. Robert, any additional word on casualties?
Well, Tom, actually there have been about 200 casualties, some of them very severe, at least 8 deaths, and 5 of those were firefighters or policemen. We're not sure which one. But one of the things that's amazing about being here is that it has been much slower than anyone anticipated. That's a lot of casualties, of course, and but the casualties have been coming out of Lower Manhattan at a much slower speed than people anticipated. I think just because as one rescue worker who had been down there told me, it's just hell down there. You can't move around. You can't discern who's a body part from a living human being in several of the areas. So we have a very dedicated staff standing by. Large numbers of medical workers are ready to attend to anybody who appears.
Bob.
Several have been very severely injured, but we're still waiting.
All right, Bob. We now have the videotape of President Bush, who was diverted from Florida to Barksdale Air Force Base near Shreveport, Louisiana. This is what he had to say to the nation moments ago.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
President George W. Bush, in his capacity today, not only as President of the United States, but also as Commander-in-Chief as U.S. military forces around the world are on the highest possible alert. There is so much uncertainty in this situation. Who is responsible? When it could happen again? And where? These are questions that are still unresolved as we try to work our way through this day. I'm joined on the telephone now by the former National Security Advisor in the Clinton administration, Sandy Berger, a longtime veteran of national security matters in this country. Mr. Berger, in all of your contingency planning during your days in the White House, did you ever anticipate anything like this, 4 hijacked airliners that would be driven into the Twin Trade Towers and the Pentagon?
Well, Tom, I think for some time we have known that terrorism is the greatest security threat that this country faced. We've seen some horrible incidents here before. We broke up a multi-pronged effort on Millennium Weekend, but this certainly goes beyond anything that we have seen before in its dimensions and sophistication.
As we work our way through this day of shock and grief and still trying to count the number of casualties, We also have to say, however, that there has been a stunning failure of intelligence at the highest possible level. The American people are going to wonder why they spent billions of dollars of intelligence if we can't find out about a complex operation like this that involves so many people.
Well, I think all of that is going to have to be sifted out. I think that in the midst of our outrage and anger, President Bush is right. We have to show the world that we will respond to this both with determination and with steadiness. That means first, obviously, focusing on security and on rescue, then on determining who's responsible. And this is of such magnitude that it's inconceivable to me that we will not soon know what the origin of this is. And then how we did not detect this, since it obviously involved a multiple operation based on from the United States. But blame, I think, the blame game, I think, comes, in my judgment, after we do everything we can to take care of the people who are in those buildings. We assure the security of others who may be in situations that are vulnerable, and we find out who is responsible for this absolutely horrifying set of events.
Mr. Berger, it's just not a matter of assigning blame. That's not the question. The question is, how do we get our intelligence back on track so it doesn't happen again in the next 20 minutes or the next 20 hours?
Well, I think we have to recognize that this is the overwhelming security threat to the nation, more so than any foreign nation, more so than long-range missiles. Terrorism has been and continues to be the #1 threat to our people. I think the intelligence community has intensified its efforts over the years, but this simply demonstrates that we're certainly not doing enough.
Sandy Berger, thank you very much for being with us today on what is obviously a day of great trial for this country, a great tragedy, and we have to determine how we go from here once we do begin to sort out just how many lives were lost, who is responsible for all of this, and how we can protect ourselves from this kind of attack again in the future as it continues to play out across America. Robert Knowles is on the phone with us now. He was on the 54th floor, I'm told, of one of the World Trade Center buildings when one of the planes was flown into it. Mr. Knowles, you're safely at home?
Yes, sir.
Could you turn down your television? I can hear it in the background, and that will cause us some problems if we continue our discussion. Okay. Tell me exactly where you were and what happened to you.
I was on the 54th floor.
Of #1 building or #2?
#1 building.
And when were you first aware of the attack?
Well, something hit the building, and it knocked me to the floor. And then the whole window blew out of the office I was in. And it snatched the desk out of the office like it was a piece of paper.
And how did you get out of that office?
By the grace of God, I was holding on to the door so I wouldn't be sucked out the window.
And then did you go down the stairs?
Yeah, going down the stairs was really rough because it was from the 30th floor down, it was water. The sprinklers was on. And then I pray to God for the people in the wheelchairs because they couldn't get out. They were sitting there waiting for somebody to carry them down.
How many people did you see like that, Mr. Knowles?
2 people. They were invalids. You know, they couldn't get out the wheelchairs. It wasn't a regular wheelchair. It was a kind of wheelchair where they do everything in a wheelchair.
It was a heavy mechanical wheelchair of some kind.
Yes, sir.
And then as you made your way to the bottom, that stairwell was crowded with other people trying to get out?
Yes, sir, but God bless the fact that it happened early, because if it had happened at 10:30, it would have been chaos because you couldn't get down the stairs. Between the smoke and the lights being out in the water, and the staircase was slippery.
When you finally got to the ground floor, then what happened?
Then they herded us out of the building. They told us to walk fast. We walked up towards Broadway, up Nassau, and it was glass blown from everywhere.
When you were in your office when the first explosion occurred, that was the first building that was hit.
Yes, sir.
And were there lots of people in the building at that hour?
It was a good amount of people, but not lots.
It was not full to capacity?
No, thank God.
And were there other people who, so far as you could tell, were either seriously hurt or killed in the first explosion that you could find?
No, everybody I seen was mobile. They were able to get out the building. You know, people were coughing, people fell on the stairs. They weren't hurt from the explosion. They were hurt trying to get out of the building.
Okay, Mr. Knowles, we wish you the very best, and by the grace of God, you were able to get out of there, and we know that this has been a difficult time for you, but we thank you for sharing your experience with us today.
Thank you.
Going to go to Washington now. Senator John McCain, who has declared this an act of war on the United States. It's already being described as a kind of 21st century Pearl Harbor. Senator McCain.
I think that's accurate in many respects, Tom, although clearly the implications of this are very significant, and including the fact that at least we knew exactly who it was that took these actions against the United States at Pearl Harbor. And obviously at this point we don't know who it was or which organization or nation may have been sponsoring this kind of activity.
We're obviously in the early stages dealing still with the shock and the grief, trying to count the number of casualties, but this country will have to take immediate action in terms of how we rearrange ourselves now to hope that we don't have this happen again. We're going to have some profound changes in America, Senator.
I'm afraid so. I think that our lifestyles will not be the same for a very long period of time because of security requirements. I also think that, as I was watching you earlier, there is going to have to be an evaluation about our intelligence capability, and part of that evaluation will be recognition that we don't have the kind of human intelligence capabilities that perhaps we need. We have excellent technical capabilities, but a lot of times you have to have someone on the ground to penetrate these organizations so you can know their intentions rather than their actions. But look, this is a terrible, unspeakable act. I believe the American people will rally behind and support the President of the United States, and I believe that we will find out who did this, and I think we will respond. And I don't know how you could describe it, very frankly, any other way but an act of war.
You grew up in the conventional military, and we have such an investment in all of that, but for some time, national security officials across all administrations have been saying the great threat to this country is terrorism. Have we devoted enough attention to this kind of an act?
It's very difficult for me to second guess. I think there's going to be plenty of that kind of activity. I would repeat that when I talk to people in the field and when I travel around the world, our lack of human intelligence capability, part of that is the difficulty in penetrating some of these organizations. As you know, they're very difficult, but that may be an area that would have to be addressed. Our technical capabilities, our satellites and others are absolutely superb and sometimes phenomenal. But you've got to divine people's motives. As I said, you've got to get these things before the act is being carried out, and that's probably an area that we have to look at. But I'm sure that this administration and the Congress will devote all their efforts to making sure not only that the people who perpetrated it are punished, but also that it never happens again.
Senator, is it too early to speculate on whether or not we're going to need protective air cover over the nation's capital and some of our more critical areas?
I don't know. I do know that average citizens are going to find it a much more complicated process going to an airport and getting onto an airplane. That'll be one of the first, obviously, one of the first and necessary evaluations that are needed, because I think it's pretty clear now that these planes were hijacked, and how they were able to do that in the case of at least 4 airplanes is going to be a subject of great interest and perhaps some controversy, because there's been this issue of security at airports for a long period of time. How much inconvenience versus how much security, which has been one debate that's been in Congress and in other areas of government as well. So I think that rather than attacking it from having air cover over the Capitol, perhaps we ought to devote our efforts to going places where these acts of terror originate. That would probably be much more effective and cost-effective as well.
Senator, we're still dealing, as I say, with the initial stages of shock, but in fact, it is hard to overstate the magnitude of all of this or the continuing effect that it will have on the business of this nation.
Well, I don't, there's never been anything like this in our lifetime. Pearl Harbor was a horrible and dastardly deed, and I don't like to compare it to Pearl Harbor, but this is unprecedented in its scope and frankly, its efficiency.
Senator John McCain, thank you very much for being with us today.
Tom.
Thank you. Under these very difficult circumstances. It's also worth pointing out that in Pearl Harbor, it was a military attack on a military installation. This was an attack by terrorists using innocent American civilians, for the most part, in hijacked airliners directed at targets filled with civilians, with the exception of the Pentagon, obviously. Let's go to NBC's Robert Hager now for an update. 4 planes hijacked today, Bob, 2 United, 2 American. Bring us up to date.
With a total toll just in the airplanes, so thousands dead presumably on the ground, but just in the airplanes, 266 dead. She said 2 American planes, 2 United planes. 2 of those planes were taking off from Boston, 1 from Newark, and 1 from Washington Dulles. 2 went into the World Trade Center buildings, 1 went into the Pentagon, and 1 crashed in rural Pennsylvania with no idea where that one was being hijacked to. At last report, and this report was about 40 minutes ago, there were now only 50 planes left in the air, 50 commercial flights over domestic U.S. airspace. So that is saying no new flights were being allowed to take off, haven't since 9:30 Eastern time this morning. The planes that were already in the air were allowed to continue on. There were only 50 of those still in the air. They were mostly about 20 minutes away from airports, so presumably almost all of those should have landed by now. There were also 22 international flights still in the air, heading here. Initially, the word was they were going to be diverted to Canada, and then the decision was made that that would be just too hard for Canadians to handle, and so those 22 flights were going to be allowed to land in the U.S. So far, we don't know of any of them landing. But this is a very important point. The FAA knew of no problems with any of those 50 planes still in the air in the U.S. or 22 in international airspace bound here. So that would seem to indicate that the problems are over in terms of these hijackings. Just to run the flights down very quickly, the first was an American airliner, Boston to Los Angeles. There were 92 killed on board that one. It went into the World Trade Center. That was the first event. Then there was a United plane leaving from Boston. 65 were killed on it. It also went into the World Trade Center. It, too, as the American plane before it, was supposed to have been bound Boston to Los Angeles. Then there was an American airliner leaving from Dulles Airport bound for Los Angeles, 64 aboard, and it crashed into the Pentagon. And finally, a United flight leaving Newark Airport bound for San Francisco. It went into rural Pennsylvania, so we don't know what its intended target was. Now, in terms of what Senator McCain was talking about, when you think of a plane being hijacked, you've got to get the hijackers aboard, and you have to get some sort of deathly weapon aboard, like a gun or some explosives. And there are 2 ways to do that. Either they go through passenger screening and manage to sneak through passenger screening without getting caught, or you get behind the doors somehow and sneak those people aboard behind passenger screening as though they were an airport employee. There have been investigations done on both those things. The FAA tests them a lot with plainclothes people to see if they get through, and every time they do it, a sizable percentage do get through passenger screening with mock weapons or mock explosives. And the same thing on the employees behind the lines. A sizable number do manage to get through the doors. So we'll be seeing in coming days what it was that led to all of this. Tom?
Bob, any indication from the FAA of radio traffic indicating that there was a hijacking underway?
No, what it is in the cockpit, presuming that an armed person in the course of a hijacking, an armed person or somebody with explosives has broken into the cockpit, the pilot, therefore, cannot say it over the open radio because the hijacker would take action against the pilot. So there's a button that you push, and the button sends out a code, and it tells the appropriate air traffic controllers, and word is flashed to Washington immediately that there's a hijacking in progress. So one could presume that that happened in all 4 of these flights. Of course, we don't know at the moment, but it certainly must have. Then you wonder, too, because the targets were hit so precisely, Is that somebody standing behind a pilot and saying, okay, now fly this right into a World Trade Center tower? Or is it an experienced pilot, the hijacker himself, who gets the pilot out of his seat and takes over at the controls to guide it in at the last minute? We don't know, of course. So.
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Robert Hager, who will be monitoring the airline part of all of this. The 4 hijacked airliners, in effect, became guided missiles in the hands of terrorists who hijacked the plane. They took innocent people to death with them, 266 altogether. President Bush is at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana at this time. We're told other senior members of the Bush administration are in secure positions. There's code red at the Capitol right now. House Speaker Dennis Hastert was removed to a secure position. All financial markets have been closed down. All national monuments have been evacuated. Across America, in places like Minneapolis, Kentucky, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, a number of critical installations have been closed down as well. This country, the most powerful in the world, has been, in effect, semi-immobilized today by these terrorist attacks. And we can only hope that they are now all over with. When we heard this morning at 8:42 that the World Trade Center had been attacked, we thought that that was a single, a solitary and horrifying event. Not too long after that, the second one was hit. And then NBC's Jim Miklashevsky here on NBC said an explosion was felt at the Pentagon. And that was a plane that went into the Pentagon, another airliner, near the Hillip pad there. It fortunately was on the far side of the building from the most critical offices housing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Intelligence Center, and of course Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, who at first did not want to evacuate the building, and then he was persuaded that that was in the best national interest of this country to do just that. And then, of course, we had the situation in Pennsylvania where a United airliner crashed into the ground. It, too, had been hijacked. James Lee Witt is the former head of the Federal Emergency Administration in the Clinton administration. He was well known during his tenure there because there were so many natural disasters around the country. Mr. Witt, what is FEMA doing at this hour?
Well, Tom, I'm sure that they've already activated the Operations Center and also talking to the City of New York Emergency Management and Governor Pataki's office in putting together whatever resources they can to support their efforts in meeting that immediate need. And I'm sure they're probably activating some search and rescue teams. Probably. Go ahead.
I know, James, from our own experiences together that you had lots of contingency plans for tornadoes and for hurricanes, those kinds of natural disasters. What did you have in planning at FEMA for a terrorist attack?
Well, of course, you know, after the Oklahoma City bombing, Tom, we've worked very hard in putting together a very strong federal response plan in which they have continued to work on, particularly adding the terrorist component to that, and working with the FBI, who will have the lead on this in crisis management. And, of course, FEMA has a consequence management, and I'm sure Director Albaugh and all the staff there are liaisoning with the FBI at this time.
Was that something that you prepared on your own, or did you do that in close coordination and get regular updates from the FBI?
We worked very closely with the FBI, and if there was a threat, then they would notify us and work very closely with them, and as far as having someone in their operations center.
When you look at those pictures of what happened in lower Manhattan, in the canyons of this great city with those two 110-story buildings coming down, you can only imagine what the carnage must be on the ground.
It's probably horrifying, and I saw earlier said it looked like a war zone, and I'm sure it does, and just looking at the pictures. But, you know, there's so many firefighters and police officers that were probably up at the base of that building, probably in that building, trying to get people out, and I'm sure that, you know, the loss is going to be tremendous, and the pain is going to be felt for a long, long time.
Jimmy Lee Witt, thank you very much. By the way, Afghanistan's ruling Taliban movement on Tuesday said that Osama bin Laden, they're closely allied with him, was not responsible for the attacks on the United States. What happened in the United States, according to the Taliban, was not a job of ordinary people. It could have been the work of governments. Osama bin Laden cannot do this kind of work. Neither can we, a Taliban spokesman said from the southern city of Kandahar. The Taliban, of course, a very militant and very conservative Islamic organization and widely believed to be harboring Osama bin Laden, a very wealthy Saudi dissident who has a very sophisticated apparatus at his disposal. He has not been seen for some time, although he does appear from time to time on some Islamic media outlets. One reporter who has been in touch with him said that 3 weeks ago he said an attack was planned on the United States, but that, of course, has not yet been verified. He is, at the moment, I think fair to say, at the top of everyone's list of suspects. But as we have learned on these occasions in times past, it's often not the best thing to do to make a premature judgment. There is the picture that we have often seen of him as he has declared a holy war against the United States. Let's go to General Norman Schwarzkopf now, who had the Southern Command and, of course, commanded the forces during the Persian Gulf War. General Schwarzkopf, I've been trying to review in my own mind the incidents in which the United States has been a conspicuous participant or absent in the past month or so. We lost a spy plane over southern Iraq. We've stepped up pressure on southern Iraq. Obviously, in the Middle East, in the ongoing dispute between the Palestinians and the Israelis, there's a great feeling that the United States is siding only with the Israelis. The war in Sudan goes on, but we've not taken an active role there. Are there any other signs on your radar screen that would indicate that this kind of thing was likely to happen?
Well, you know, Tom, the truth of the matter is that most of the Middle East countries consider the United States to be, you know, the main source of support for Israel. It isn't isolated just in certain states. And, you know, any one of those people, if you got them aside and asked them truthfully, they would tell you that they were not in favor of our policies with regard to Israel.
So do you think that that probably was the cause of all this continual escalation that has been going on between Palestine and Israel? And there's been an absence of participation, I think that it's fair to say, on the part of this administration and all that.
Well, I think that's kind of speculation at this time. I certainly think that you know, the reason why the United States is hated in so many places in the Middle East is with regard to the support of the state of Israel. And as a matter of fact, they'll openly state that if Israel had not had the support of the United States, it wouldn't exist today. So they go so far as to say that.
There are people, many people, still trapped.
When you and I were talking earlier, we were commenting on the sophistication of this attack and the complexity of that. Doesn't that stun you some?
It really does. I mean, just what was mentioned by, you know, by Robert Hager, the fact that undoubtedly, you know, I can't see any U.S. commercial airline pilot flying their plane directly into an obstacle like that. Undoubtedly, there was, you know, somebody at the controls that was able to guide the plane there. That in itself is kind of scary. I told you earlier about the fact that it bothers me that with all the devices we have against hijackers, that hijacking can still take place on this scale and organized in that fashion. That causes me concern. I certainly agree with what Senator McCain said about the fact that, you know, many years ago, we abandoned human intelligence. The attitude was that only bad guys have spies, and good guys don't need spies, and we put satellites in the air, and we put a huge amount of investment into technical intelligence. At the same time, we dismantled human intelligence. I don't know what the status of that is today, but we damn sure need to get somebody inside these organizations. I would tell you that...
General, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment because we're looking at some scenes that we have not yet had an opportunity to see. It does look like a nuclear winter in lower Manhattan. It is one of the most vital areas anywhere in the world, obviously, the home of the financial markets, the World Trade Center, lots of residences. There's been a real revival down there in recent years, and it has a great gray pall of dust and smoke and debris, and of course, overlaying all that is the psychological effect of knowing that there could be a casualty list in terms of fatalities that could go into the thousands.
Yeah. I mean, Pearl Harbor, we lost 2,400. And, you know, when you hear the numbers today, it's hard to believe that we're not going to greatly exceed that number.
And as I pointed out earlier, in Pearl Harbor, it was the military attacking a military installation. This was the use of innocent people in commercial airliners to attack other innocent people in New York. There was one military target, obviously the Pentagon. You can see, if you're looking at this with me, General, the extent of the damage in lower Manhattan.
Yeah, unbelievable. Unbelievable. And you know, it's the natural inclination is, okay, we got to hit somebody back. And in this case, what's going to, be even more frustration to the national psyche is you can't hit back. You don't who you're going to hit at this stage of the game.
Yep. Thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf. We'll ask you to stand by. We'll be coming back to you. This is as effective as a bomb being dropped there. There were two bombs in effect. Commercial airliners flown into those two buildings, and they came down. We presume because of the initial explosion, there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists. Robert Harper was one of those who was in the area when all of this occurred. Mr. Harper?
Yes. Tom, how are you today?
Tell me where you were when the first plane flew into the first building.
I was down below the World Trade Centers. I was arriving at work just a little late, and the first plane had crashed into the building, so there were many people, sort of standing around. There were EMS workers running around as well, and you could see the second plane coming around and everyone sort of pointing up, and then that second plane just crashed into the building.
And what about the people who were trying to get out of the building? We had one report of bodies falling through the air and people jumping from windows. Did you see any of that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a very traumatic day, I think, having seen that, because where the initial explosion was, there was a lot of black smoke coming out of around, I believe it was around the 78th floor, and you saw people jumping for their lives out of the 78th floor of the World Trade Center. Smoke everywhere, fire everywhere, and people were continuing to jump out of the 78th floor. So people began to run away because once the second explosion happened, the debris that was caused by that began to fall everywhere, and everybody just started running toward the mayor's office. I began to run toward the Woolworth building, which was close to that. And then as I got closer to that, I realized if the top of the World Trade Center hit the Woolworth building, that building too would be affected, and it might also fall down.
Did you have a sense right away that these buildings could come down?
Not initially. For about 15 minutes or so, people only thought, they couldn't really tell what had happened. And only after the second plane hit did people realize that, this is probably something that was orchestrated. And so then people initially who had, been trying to go back to the scene and try to help people realized that another plane had hit the building. And that's when people said, look, this can't have been a mistake.
Where are you now?
I'm outside of the emergency room at Presbyterian Hospital. I've just been released for smoke inhalation. I've been in the hospital there. They rushed me to the hospital, not too long after that, because the black soot and everything that was associated with the building, heavy black smoke engulfed the entire financial district, from 9 o'clock onward. And we were sitting on the side of the road. EMS workers were there administering oxygen to people, thinking that everything was okay. And then as they began to realize that the explosion might have caused so much trauma to both the World Trade Center that they would fall, then everybody just began to run because they saw that the building itself was actually going to fall. So all of the people that had gone to help out were then put in double danger, because you were then running, and the building literally came and fell over the entire financial district area there. It was a complete nightmare, black smoke everywhere. People were running toward the Brooklyn Bridge, running, away from the mayor's office, afraid that the falling part of the World Trade Center would hit other buildings, and that would, cause a topple effect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harper, and thank God you're okay, and I hope that you'll be able to deal with all of this. We do appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a real mess, and I can't, coming back in the ambulance, somebody said, one of the things that they remembered, thinking about is the date today is September 11th, so 9/11. So, it's something that can't really go without notice, is that this was completely planned, completely orchestrated. Whoever did this has been planning this obviously for a very long time.
Thank you very much, Robert Harper, who was one of the survivors who was just a little bit late to work this morning, but then got caught in the devastating attack on the Twin Trade Towers. It's hard for me to overstate to people who are unfamiliar with New York just how dynamic that area is in terms of people coming and going. The two towers are 110 stories high, or they were. 20 to 50,000 people would work in them at any one time. It's just a few blocks from the stock market and from many of the principal banks in America, to say nothing of residential areas. And we will not know for some time what the death toll is there, to say nothing of the number of people who have been injured, so many of them with burns. Let's go to Washington now, and NBC's Washington Bureau Chief, Tim Russert. Tim, give us the state of play in the nation's capital right now. We know that the White House and the State Department and CIA have been evacuated. Dennis Hastert has been removed. Where is Dick Cheney at this hour? Do we know?
Tom, he is in a secure location. They won't tell us exactly, but I do know that he is there with his top-level aides. We have heard from some of those people. He has been in constant communication with the President of the United States and the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice. Tom, I've been speaking to people in the intelligence and law enforcement community, in and out, those who have served, those who are serving now. No one is the least bit surprised that there was a terrorist attack on the shores of America. Every person, to a man and woman, absolutely stunned, not only by the magnitude, but by the precision of this attack. They are absolutely convinced that there's only a few cells that could possibly have done this. And this is quite interesting because I didn't realize it until it was pointed out to me. Every one of the 4 hijacked planes that Bob Hager talked to you about was bound for California. In the words of this high-ranking official, the bastards knew they all had a plane full of fuel for the maximum impact upon collision. There is, in my experience in Washington, unprecedented anger here, but no one knows how or where to channel it. Right now, the situation is a bit chaotic. Communication is difficult, but the Bush administration is underscoring that the President is in charge, in command, in constant communication, and will bring these people to justice. They just know it's going to take a long, long time.
Tim, it's also going to be a test of the political maturity, if you will, of Washington. It's a city that has been so riven by what many would describe as petty political disputes. But this is one nation on this day.
Suddenly, the Social Security lockbox seems so trivial, Tom. One official said to me, Tim, your life is going to change, but more important, your son's life is going to change forever. America will never be the same after September 11th, 2001. The levels of security, heightened tension, the way we look at each other and look at our institutions will, in fact, be altered. That will bring some gratitude, if you will, to the terrorists. And that's why we as a nation, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, are, as they talk with one another today, are absolutely unified in their attempt to strike back, but also try to put salve on the national psyche so we don't become an armed camp resisting an enemy we really can't identify and never know when is striking.
Because the consequences psychologically for this country are every bit as great as they are physically for America as well. It is worth pointing out, I suppose, that we all breathed a great sigh of relief when the Cold War came to an end with the collapse of communism. And yet there was nothing as devastating as this for this country during that long, cold twilight that we faced down communism in Moscow with its considerable nuclear arsenal, which it still has in place, obviously.
You know, Tom, it's a very important point because all during this past few weeks, the debate about missile defense systems, many people were saying publicly, even those proponents or the detractors, well, you know, we're a long way from research on this, but there is a potential threat of a rogue nation launching a missile or an accidental launch from Russia or China modernizing their force. But everyone kept saying the true risk, the real risk is terrorist attack, and we plain don't know how to defend ourselves. But again, and let me underscore this, people are absolutely stunned, disbelieving that something so well coordinated, something is with a tick-tock like this, 4 hijackings within a matter of an hour, and then being able to take those very planes and drive them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And there is growing suspicion, Tom, here that the plane that landed, it crashed in Pennsylvania, was most likely headed for the Capitol or White House. That's the operating theory of many of the people I've spoken to today.
Thank you very much, NBC's Tim Russert. The equation has changed for all of us personally and professionally in the course of the last several hours, and we'll be dealing with this for a long, long time. But first we want to take you through the eyewitness accounts of people who were witness to what happened here on a very sunny early fall morning in New York today. Some of the eyewitnesses.
I spent a year in combat. I never saw anything like this. Before, a lot of people died, but nothing this devastating.
We carried a bunch of people that we found laying in the debris. It was complete darkness. We stumbled over some people. We picked them up and carried them across the street.
You could hear the rumbling. When you looked up, you could see the top of the building just fumbling.
Then there was the haunting story from an eyewitness that we heard from a few moments ago of people in wheelchairs who were unable to get out of the building as he ran down the stairs, and he was obviously overcome with emotion as he described that for us. We don't have any numbers for you. We're trying to be as circumspect as we can be. All public officials are saying that they expect the final death toll to be horrendous, but this business of determining how many people are still in the rubble will take many, many hours, if not days, to determine. Here is a quick summary of what we have been through today in this country. On the 11th of September, the year 2001, at 8:42 this morning, first one plane that had been hijacked crashed into the World Trade Center. Then, not too long after that, a second plane. About an hour later, the Pentagon was attacked by a hijacked airliner, and then came word that another hijacked airliner had crashed outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When we saw the first reports and witnessed, those of us who live in New York, of the World Trade Center being hit by an airplane, at first all of us thought, I'm sure, that it had to be some kind of a terrible accident. And then, when we heard that a second plane, and you could see it flown deliberately into the World Trade Center, the horror of this terrorist war began to unfold, and it continues to unfold here now almost 5 hours later. And we'll be continuing to cover this across America and in the nation's capital. NBC's Pat Dawson has been not too far from the World Trade Center throughout most of the day, where it has been chaotic and terrifying. Pat?
Tom, as you point out, we try not to exaggerate very much in this circumstance, and yet in many ways it's hard not to exaggerate just the things we have been seeing and the things that we have been told. I think it is fair to say that the task that now confronts rescue workers here is Herculean, a very, very difficult task, and it is of two parts. It has been about 3 hours since what we might call the last catastrophic incident in a morning of catastrophes. That is since the North Tower of the World Trade Center, which used to stand behind me just about 10 blocks south, right below there. It used to tower above the buildings, which you can see, and obviously it is no longer there, nor is the South Tower. 3.5 hours since that happened. There have been no catastrophic incidents since then, but it has affected the rescue effort clearly because they are afraid of what could happen, what still might happen, since there were a sequence of catastrophes, if you will. That has made the rescue very, very difficult. At this point, we are being told unofficially that there may be as many as 200 to 300 rescue workers who are actually down there. We have seen pictures of some of them. They are down around the base of this building. They are beginning the, again to use that word, Herculean task of trying to find the people who might be alive in that debris. We know that there are a great number of people who are dead in there, unquestionably. What they are hoping to find is survivors, and at this point they really can't speculate on how many there are, how many there could be, and I don't think it really serves us at this point to speculate on the numbers that it could be. One of the tasks, though, is to try to get this rescue effort in its entirety going, and as you can see behind me down here, there are probably hundreds of New York City and New York State and federal rescue people who are involved, fire, police, emergency service, quite a few. In addition to those, the task is certainly aided by the American Red Cross's disaster relief teams. They are here on the scene. This is Frank Donahue, who is with the American Red Cross. Frank, tell me first of all, as you start out here, what is it you're trying to do?
Well, our immediate purpose is to kind of assess what role the Red Cross can play initially, and certainly it's to help the emergency medical people that are here provide any kind of relief and support we can for them. People being evacuated from neighborhoods need a place to go, and the Red Cross is setting up service centers and shelters. There's one at Grand Central Station and Penn Station. And then the blood supply, making sure we have a safe blood supply, not only here, but throughout the country.
Do you have any idea, have you heard, how many casualties have been dealt with so far?
No, I have not. I'm sorry, I have not heard that.
Is it, now part of your task, though, is also to provide blood supplies. Obviously, that will be needed in huge
Absolutely, and people throughout the country are responding. They should call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. It's important to know that this incident, and you know, there's blood needed here in Altoona, there's blood needed all throughout affected by this disaster. Another part is people that are moving around, are traveling today, knowing that this country's open. And so Red Cross volunteers are in every airport providing assistance to families. Families are calling the Red Cross here in New York as they are calling their local Red Cross to try to communicate and find the well-being of people that were in this building, as well as people in the other affected areas. So
you were also telling me about grief counseling and dealing with people who've been traumatized around the country, maybe at other airports.
Absolutely. Boston, for example, LAX, where those airplanes were coming from and headed to, we have Red Cross mental health worker volunteers there that are providing assistance to families. And again, that's happening throughout the country where people have been affected by this disaster. Here in New York alone, the Greater New York Red Cross has had lots of experience at the World Trade Center a number of years ago. Today, there's about 1,200 local Red Cross volunteers here in New York providing food and shelter, direction, and support to people that are incredibly affected by this incident.
And how many Red Cross workers do you think around the country?
Oh, a number of thousand, a couple thousand for sure. I know in Philadelphia, where I came from, we're on standby working with emergency management. It's the same thing in every major metropolitan area that Red Cross workers work closely with emergency management.
Frank, thank you so much for taking some time out. We appreciate it. That was Frank Donahue, the American Red Cross. Tom, that brings you pretty much as much information as we have here in what remains a fairly chaotic situation. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pat Dawson. As the shock begins to wear down, we're going to all of us are going to have our patience tested as well. Of course, we'll try to deal with it as factually as we possibly can. It does now appear that the wave of attacks is over. A few hours ago, as there were these reports of planes that were still in the air, some that had been hijacked at that time. This is a live picture of Lower Manhattan, missing two of its most familiar profiles, obviously. The twin trade towers of the World Trade Center, iconic buildings here in New York, really representing, symbolic, if you will, of the enormous economic strength of this country. They sustained an attack in 1993. They were reopened. The country came back from that, and we went about our merry way again, thinking that in Fortress America, this couldn't possibly happen. But of course it has. Neil Livingston is one of the most widely recognized experts on international terrorism. Mr. Livingston, we keep coming back to the same issue. This was a very sophisticated attack. This was not just a lone suicide bomber of some kind. 4 hijacking simultaneously. Obviously someone in the cockpit who knew how to get the plane to the targets that they wanted to get them to. And it had to have happened over a long period of time, and they were all transcontinental flights loaded with fuel.
Tom, this is our worst-case nightmare scenario, the one that we've hoped would never happen, and that would be a multiplicity of targets with a multiplicity of highly sophisticated bombs, in this case aircraft, and very symbolic targets. And so this great deal of thought went into this, a great deal of time and money. This kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. So we can anticipate that maybe a year or more was probably devoted to planning this attack, and there may be others coming.
Mr. Livingston, I remember that the FBI has been concerned for some time about the number of cells harboring terrorists in America that have been growing. Is that true?
Well, there clearly are a number of people in the United States that have been the beneficiaries of our relatively liberal immigration policy that have hidden within various communities here and have expressed very strong anti-American sentiments. Whether that can be translated into terrorism at this point is open to question. I would suspect that what we will see in this case are perhaps foreign nationals who have arrived in the United States strictly to carry out this mission, hijack these aircrafts, and take them to their targets. Very similar to what we saw in that millennial potential attack when a man was arrested at the border in Washington State who was going to carry out bombing attacks in the United States. He was an outsider who had been sent here to do that.
All right, Neil Livingston, thank you very much. I also have on the phone now Anthony Lake, Tony Lake, a former National Security Advisor to President Clinton, who's been a longtime student of the prospect of terrorism in this country, recently wrote a riveting fictional account of the various scenarios that the United States may have to deal with. But even in your most wildest imaginative days, Tony, you could not have anticipated something like this.
No, it's terrible. It's hard to say you can be lucky in any respect in something in such a catastrophe. But one of the great dangers still lurking out there is that it could have involved some kind of weapon of mass destruction.
But at the same time, it's hard to understate the amount of damage that has been done here physically and certainly in terms of loss of life when you have an institution like the Pentagon attacked, the World Trade Center is attacked, and the plane that went to Pittsburgh might have been headed for the Capitol or the White House.
Yes. No, this is terrible. As I said, a catastrophe. Clearly a very sophisticated terrorist attack. Our intelligence community has headed off some in the past year or two. Their ability to evade our usual intelligence gathering methods in order to pull this off is extraordinary. And one question now we need to focus on is not only why did this happen, but where do we go from here?
Well, short term, length of time, no one knows for sure how many people may be alive. No one can say how many people may in fact be dead, but the numbers are in the thousands. And that's the USS George Washington. It's off the coast of Long Island. It is providing military support and air cover for the eastern seaboard. The president today did in fact use the phrase, "We are at war with these terrorists." What they did to us was a declaration of active war. The most frantic rescue efforts are underway in lower Manhattan, of course, and NBC's David Bloom is in a position to tell us what is going on there now. David?
Well, Tom, this is a haunting, even demoralizing vantage point from which to see the immense destruction and the incredible rescue effort that's going on here in lower Manhattan. We are on Church Street, 6 blocks north of where the World Trade Center used to stand. And if we push in off into the distance, you can see the still smoking hulk of the South Tower, the number 2 tower of the World Trade Center. Tom, it is just an incredible scene here in the sense that you can see the rescue workers who have been here literally since more than some 28 hours now from when this first explosion occurred just around 9 a.m. yesterday. Most of them, if you look down, you can see the rescue workers, firefighters mixed in with police officers, as well as National Guard troops here on the scene. Many of them wearing the masks because the debris and the filter in the air is still spewing up. Having said that, we do know of some small successes that have occurred thus far. To the best of our knowledge, at this hour, 8 individuals have been rescued from the scene. 5 firefighters, 3 police officers since last night, pulled from the rubble alive. You can see, Tom, if we pan down here onto the street, some of the rescue workers coming out. Many of these individuals have been inside just 6 blocks to the south for much of this morning. They come out, they essentially grab a quick bite to eat, grab some water, turn around and go back inside. You might also be able to spot the Humvee with the machine gun on top. As we mentioned, National Guard troops now deployed here in lower Manhattan, not because there's been any trouble, but really merely to help the police and the firefighters. Of course, it has been a horrific 28 hours. Here's the sequence of events as we put them together thus far. Amidst the devastation, a glimmer of hope. Today, authorities say 5 New York City firefighters and 1 police officer were pulled from the wreckage, in addition to the 2 police officers rescued last night. And there may be others still trapped inside the World Trade Center's collapsed remains. Reports of cell phone calls from a few survivors pleading for help.
We do know there are people in the building that are alive. We know that for a fact. We're very hopeful that there are pockets where there are people, not only the ones that we know about, but hopefully others.
The president today condemns the attacks and vows to punish those responsible.
The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win.
But elsewhere, the news is grim. The president last night puts the death toll from the attacks in the thousands after an estimated 12 to 20 terrorists wielding makeshift knives hijacked 4 domestic airliners. Brand new video obtained overnight shows the first attack plane crashing into the World Trade Center's North Tower. Minutes later, television helicopters record the second plane crashing into the South Tower. The 2 110-story buildings so badly damaged that they collapse, one after the other. Among the missing...
That was the scene yesterday as recounted by David Bloom. There are some late developments. NBC's Pete Williams, who's our Justice Department correspondent, has been talking on the telephone with federal law enforcement officials. They say that some arrests are being made this morning in connection with the terrorist attacks. They're describing these people as material witness warrants. The officials say the arrests are being made when the people decline to answer questions or otherwise cooperate. This is at the Westin Copley Hotel. The FBI bomb squad is inside. That's in Boston. Two of the flights originated at Logan Airport in the Boston area, obviously. We don't know whether this is, in fact, just a report of a bomb or if they, in fact, have found one. It's the Westin Copley Hotel in Boston. And we're going to go to NBC's Andrea Mitchell now, who is in Washington as well. She's been tracking not only the national security matters, but this law enforcement investigation that is going around the world. So, Andrea, Pete Williams is reporting that they are now issuing some material witness warrants for arrest in this case.
Exactly. Now, we should stress that these are not in any way necessarily people who are complicit or are involved in the acts of terror. These are material witness warrants for people who may have seen something or may have some other tangential involvement, people who may have perhaps even unwittingly assisted these terrorists along the way. But as you know, the FBI spread out in Florida following up a clue from one of the flight manifests and did an extensive search in Broward County, Florida last night. And we have other reports from other members of the NBC News team. Julie Holstein reporting that in Portland, Maine, a police chief spoke at a press conference this morning, Tom, and said that the FBI had directed his department to focus on two men who were on the U.S. Air flight that left Maine at 6 a.m. yesterday and that landed at Logan at 6:30 a.m., where, of course, they could have connected to several of the other flights, to two other flights. The FBI believes, Tom, that the two men spent Monday night in Maine, that they rented a blue Nissan Optima from Alamo car rental in Maine, that they had carry-on bags and had to go through security again at Logan because the plane was in a different concourse. So they are really zeroing in on a number of these players. People on the manifest, and also, as you point out from Pete Williams' note, the FBI now putting out arrest warrants for people who may have been material witnesses.
All right, that's NBC's Andrea Mitchell in Washington. We continue to watch these developments in Boston. The crowd has been pushed back from that hotel, which is in the heart of Boston. Let's listen for just a few moments to our affiliates' coverage there, WHDH Television, Channel 7 in Boston.
And so it's hard to try and figure out how the two connect.
I'll try to regain contact with Christine McKenna. I'll ask our producers to do that as we talk once again with Garvin Thomas, who's at Copley Plaza right now. Garvin?
Jonathan, I guess it's a very strange scene out here. Obviously, by now, I would say the crowd that is outside here is probably numbering in the thousands of people just on the street alone. I noticed a crowd that's gathered across the street in front of the Copley Plaza Hotel as well. Everybody wondering what is going on here, trying to figure out if it has any connection to what happened in New York City yesterday. As I said, the scene is about a half an hour old when the first emergency workers responded to a call here at the Westin Hotel. We've seen quite a response. As I said, I can count 3 ambulances in front. There was a SWAT team which arrived about 15-20 minutes ago. I'd say about a dozen members, fully outfitted in their Kevlar gear and helmets and shields. I think I noticed a battering ram at one point going in. They carried in some cases as well, which I can only speculate might be some materials used to investigate or defuse bombs, or maybe some crime scene investigation tape. They went in about 15 minutes ago. The police have not been too concerned with the safety, it appears, of the people who are outside the area now. It appears they have not evacuated the hotel. As I look up on some of the floors and peer in some of the windows, I noticed some obviously very curious residents of the hotel. As you can see, another ambulance arriving on scene here. The picture you're looking at right now, courtesy of what we call our mass cam. It's located on top.
We're going to continue to monitor the situation in Boston, and we'll go immediately back to it as soon as there are some concrete developments. We want to return to Washington now, and NBC's Andrea Mitchell, as this investigation begins to take up pace. Andrea?
Well, as you know, Tom, what they have been doing for the last 24 hours or 36 hours since all of this developed was to go back over any intelligence, any warnings, any cues that might have been missed, and also to look prospectively. So you have intelligence operatives around the world from all of our agencies working together in Langley at the counter-terrorist center, but also sending out directives to try to warn other terror groups not to think that the U.S. is vulnerable, not to try to make any kind of copycat attempt, not that anyone could, but there are freelancers, there are smaller operations that could try to imitate what has been achieved by these terrorists against the United States. And part of this is to look to see if anyone else is also making threats. Now, part of what they're doing, obviously, is also pursuing the investigation. And as we've been reporting since yesterday, the primary suspect in their light, with a great deal of evidence that is mounting, is the operation and groups associated with Osama bin Laden. They have warned people in the region. They have talked through the Pakistanis, have sent, we're told by briefers who were briefing in Washington today, that a Pakistani military delegation has gone to Kabul to speak to the Taliban leaders and let them know that if there ever were time to avoid retaliation and do something cooperatively with Osama bin Laden, that moment is now. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. As we continue to watch the situation in Boston, we're beginning to get more names that are being released by the airlines, but the news continues not to be good out of the World Trade Center area, where they continue to search for bodies and for people who may still be alive. There were reports last night that some people were on their cell phones trying to tell searchers where they were at that time. Some better news, however, in Washington today in terms of the death toll at the Pentagon. At one point last night, we were told that as many as 800, mostly military personnel, had been killed when the airliner was driven into the side of the Pentagon yesterday morning, shortly after the attack on the World Trade Center. NBC's Jim Miklaszewski is there for us again today. Jim, what is the latest on the count there?
Well, Tom, according to Pentagon officials, the latest death toll here at the Pentagon appears to be just over 100. Some 40 to 50 Army personnel, both military and civilian. Some 40 to 50 Army or Navy, again, civilian and military. And approximately 7 defense intelligence employees, all civilians, according to officials here in the Pentagon. There was some confusion here yesterday. That entire area that was hit by this airliner yesterday is an area in transition. A lot of people moving into offices, out of offices. And so when everybody scattered, it was difficult to keep track. And it wasn't until this morning, when people started to report back to work, that they actually started to get a much better number on those still missing. And they've narrowed it down to approximately 100 or 107 they hope, anyway, at the maximum. But they say that it will take at least a week before rescue workers and recovery operations can really be concluded in that region, because the area is still so unstable. It's a danger to rescue workers, and because some fires continue to burn there. In fact, a short time ago, Tom, they put out an alert and were ready to evacuate the entire building because a hot spot had occurred in the roof above us, but then they got that contained, and they decided we could stay. But very unstable in that entire section, so it's going to be some time before we get any kind of exact casualty count out of there. But we are told that notification of next of kin has already begun, and perhaps Secretary Rumsfeld himself will talk to us later this afternoon to give us that information. Tom?
All right, thanks, NBC's Jim Miklaszewski. We have on the telephone now our Justice Department correspondent, Pete Williams, who was in the backcountry of the American West when all of this happened. He's now in Denver, and he's been working the telephones. He did report to us that material witness warrants have been issued. They're beginning to pick up people who refuse to cooperate with investigators. Pete, you expect that we're going to see more incidents like the one that we're witnessing right now in Boston?
Yes, Tom. Federal law enforcement officials say we're going to see a lot of this in the coming days. People taken into custody, anyone who has any potential connection with the suspected terrorists, for whom the authorities wish to keep track of, and they may want to ask them additional questions. Anyone who isn't completely cooperative with agents will probably be arrested on material witness warrants. We saw a lot of this similar kind of thing, although certainly not on this scale, in the days and weeks leading up to the millennium, when after the Ahmed Rissam came across the border with a car full of explosives, and immediately the FBI and other law enforcement officials began to try to figure out how extensive this potential terrorist network was. And they were making these material witness warrants all over the country, knocking on doors, going up alleys into apartments all over the country, and we're going to be seeing this probably on a much bigger scale in the coming days, authorities say. Now, they caution us to say that even as they make these arrests, we shouldn't jump to the conclusion that these people necessarily are connected to the terror plot, that it could be they're simply people who are, for whatever reasons, not being cooperative. And it's possible, they say, that some of these people could ultimately be released if it turns out they have no connection. So they caution us to not jump to any conclusions as we watch these arrests being made.
All right, Pete Williams in Denver, what else can you tell us about the nature of the investigation? Is this going on not just in this country, but around the world as well? Are they asking international authorities to cooperate with us?
Absolutely, although obviously the FBI's power to make arrests is considerably different overseas. Anyone they wanted to detain, they'd have to get host nation cooperation to do that, and I don't get any indication that they're near that at this point.
But we do have many outposts overseas. That was established under Louis Freeh, who did have this grave concern about an international network of terrorism directed at this country.
That's right. We heard John Ashcroft yesterday afternoon, the Attorney General, use that somewhat unfamiliar term, legats, that the FBI has around the country. That's short for legal attachés, FBI agents assigned to American embassies in major cities around the world. And he already indicated last night that they're very actively going after chasing leads in their cities as well.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pete Williams. Let's go to Boston now, and one of our crack investigative reporters, Chris Hansen of Dateline NBC. Boston, of course, is ground zero for this investigation because 2 of the planes were taken from there. Chris?
Absolutely, Tom. Good afternoon. The scene that you've been watching at the Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston has been repeated to a lesser degree all over town today. From talking to investigative sources in and around the airport here, FBI agents and state police have been interviewing cab drivers who may or may not have knowledge of the people involved in this. They've been talking to baggage handlers who are familiar with perhaps some of the subjects. And federal investigators are confirming that they do believe that there is an actual terrorist cell here in the Boston area with direct links to Osama bin Laden. And that's part of what's made this such an aggressive investigation today, such a fast-moving investigation today. Officially, FBI agents here are not saying much. They're saying that the word is going to come out of Washington, but we can tell you that there are literally hundreds of investigators here at the airport talking to virtually every human being that had anything to do with the flights that took off and ultimately smashed into the World Trade Center, Tom.
Okay, NBC's Chris Hansen, who is at Logan Airport in Boston. Chris, just tell us, as a matter of other interest, of course, what happened to airport security there today?
Well, airport security is going to increase incredibly here. No longer will there will be curbside baggage check-in. They're going to keep all vehicles 300 yards away from any airport building. There will be more ID checks, and only ticketed passengers will be allowed into the secure areas of the airport. There have been some other developments here, Tom, that are interesting. Reports circulating from investigators that perhaps there were 3 people who bought one-way tickets on this flight at the very last minute and boarded like perhaps 11 minutes prior to the flight. As you know, they found this vehicle here today, or rather yesterday, that has been tied to at least 2 of the suspects in the vehicle. They found flight training manuals in Arabic. They have linked this car to 2 brothers who have passports from the United Arab Emirates, and one of them is a trained pilot. They think that they are among those who were the hijackers, and there is every indication now from federal sources that they have pretty much identified all of the hijackers who took part in this on the planes, at least coming from Boston, Tom.
Thank you very much. Dateline's Chris Hansen, now our affiliate, WHDH in Boston, has reported that one person was wounded in this hotel incident, whatever it was. We just know that there was a massive show of law enforcement there. There was a van parked outside. It has since departed the hotel, but we don't know what went on inside. Again, our affiliate there is saying that they have a report that one person was wounded. We'll try to get that sorted out to you. There are names now attached to these hijackings, and two of them, Mohammed Atta and Marwan El-Shahi, that's S-H-E-H-H-I, that they took some pilot training when they were in Florida. And the pilot examiner who certified them said his records show that they were certified in November and December of the year 2000. He's still sorting out which man was certified first. They were certified in a Piper Seneca, which is a piston engine. It's a small airplane, obviously. Experienced pilots on this plane say that if you do not have to land or take off a Boeing 757 or a 767, you would likely be able to fly one of those jets after being certified in the Piper Seneca. Once those big airliners are airborne, it is not all that difficult to maneuver them, and obviously the terrorists were at the control yesterday, at the controls of those two planes that flew into the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon, and we don't know what happened to the plane that went down just outside of Philadelphia. Let's go to NBC's Ann Curry now, who is in Lower Manhattan, where the search and rescue efforts continue underway. Ann?
As you know, Tom, it is an intense search and rescue effort. I've been down here all morning, and earlier we were taken down to ground zero right at Vesey and West, which is just right in front of the World Trade Center building number 1. And we saw the collateral damage is intense. Number 1, building number 1 is just a couple stories, maybe even just 1 or 2 stories still standing, and behind it you can see the wreckage of building number 2. Off to the side, building number 7, as you know, is down. It was still smoking as of early this morning, and there is still some smoke coming out of it, although some of that may be simply smoldering smoke. It's gone on and off again, the fire there. And then also, we should probably tell you from having been on the scene that the collateral damage is intense. The Customs building, which is building number 6, has been severely impacted. There are buildings all around that have been severely impacted. In fact, one nearby building had a gaping hole about 3 stories high. Also, windows blown out a block and a half away. So there's been a lot of intense damage down here. Also, we should probably tell you that the rescuers are searching, doing the best they can in finding everybody. They brought in cranes, all kinds of heavy equipment. In addition, however, they also have robotics, robot machines. We hear some planes going overhead. I know they're police helicopters. That sounded like a military jet, military jets have been flying over this area, by the way, and the National Guard is on the scene. We've seen robotic machines that they're sending in. They brought them in this morning. They go down. They're able to go where there's so much structural damage, so much structural instability that they feel this is the only safe way to look for people who might still be alive. So what they're doing is they're sending these machines down, and these machines can send back not only images, but they can also send back information as to whether there is movement. They've also brought in infrared devices so that they can tell whether there is heat underneath the rubble. But it's a very, very intense job for them to find people who are still alive using infrared, because there's also some hot spots, as you can see. We should also tell you that this morning we have confirmed from New York Fire Department Chief, Battalion Chief Kevin Burns, confirmed to us that there was one person who was rescued this morning. He would not identify that person, whether it was a man or a woman, a rescuer or a person who was in the building, but he said that person is in the hospital and alive. And one more bit of information for you. We did also see a truck loaded with gas tanks being brought in, and when we asked what those were for, we were told that while the primary focus out here is to find people who may still be alive under this rubble, they are also efforting an attempt to find those black boxes, which were aboard, of course, both of those 2 planes that went down. They brought in the gas tanks so they can fuel the device that they need to use to cut through metal. They may be separating the people who need to find those black boxes from the devices themselves. So there is a very intense effort. We have since this morning been pushed back from ground zero, and so we're attempting to show you those pictures from above buildings and talking to whoever we can to get you more information. Tom, back to you.
All right, thanks very much. Ann Curry of NBC's Today program on duty and in the middle of it all in Lower Manhattan today, reporting on the continuing search and rescue effort that is underway there. WHDH, our affiliate in Boston. Let's listen to them for just a few moments. We did see that incident at the hotel there. They're now saying that someone has been arrested.
As anybody else is, the few staff members who I talked to, not officials for the hotel, but the people who are just giving out information as they get it, are just saying they're under the impression that police and FBI agents are here. They've been told because there could be something that's connected to the terrorist activity of the last 36 hours or so, and that they just want to see that through. But no, nobody I've talked to has had any information that there's been any specific purpose for all of these EMS and ambulances to be standing by.
Christina, we are getting some information from our colleague at NBC, Pete Williams, who is fairly well connected, that in fact authorities are looking for, quote, potential connections to terrorists there at the Westin, that they're looking for material witnesses, and that it is one of many operations to come. However, considering the fact that apparently we do have one person injured and is about to be transported, and one person reportedly in custody. And I caution our audience that with any type of breaking news like this, with unofficial information and sometimes hearsay, we have to take all of this a bit with a grain of salt. But clearly, there's quite a bit unfolding here at the Westin right now.
Because we do have some conflicting scenes here with Christina inside the hotel.
So that is an unconfirmed report that there's been an arrest at the Westin Hotel, the Copley Hotel, which is in the heart of Boston. Logan Airport was the takeoff site, obviously, for two of the airliners that were used in yesterday's terrorist attacks, and they have identified people who went from Portland, Maine to Logan and boarded those two airplanes. And in fact, two of the men, it appears, did receive some kind of pilot training in Florida last year, in the fall of last year. Here's an intriguing development. We have in Asia, Reti Santra in Singapore. She works for CNBC. She simply dialed the foreign ministry in Kabul and asked if Osama bin Laden is still in Afghanistan. And the Taliban official said that she talked to, yes, he is. I can confirm that because I have seen him. But then he wouldn't answer further questions, saying that she would have to talk with the foreign minister himself. But she did say that he did say that Osama bin Laden is in Afghanistan. There is a Pakistani military delegation en route to Afghanistan right now, apparently with a very stern message to the Taliban, that radical and very fundamentalist Islamic group that has taken over that country and is widely believed to be harboring Osama bin Laden, the man that most people think is the chief suspect in this terrorist war that has been declared on the United States. One of America's leading journalistic authorities on that part of the world is at Newsweek magazine now. He is the Middle Eastern regional editor, an old friend of mine, Chris Dickey. We spent a fair amount of time in that part of the world. But Chris, the equation has certainly changed in the last 24 hours or so.
Nobody ever imagined anything like this. I think that's one of the great problems. The terrorists were a lot more imaginative than the people who were defending the country.
What do we know about Osama bin Laden's operation, the sophistication of it? Yesterday's very complex and, I dare say, in the darkest sense of the word, brilliantly executed terrorist attack against this country shows that he has a very wide reach.
Yeah, I think the thing that you have to recognize about yesterday's operation is the reason it worked was really what the intelligence people called tradecraft, not technology. The technology was minimal, almost non-existent, razor blades, small knives. What made this operation a success from the terrorist point of view was intelligence gathering, surveillance, making a lot of very good judgments about where vulnerabilities were that security officials were not paying much attention to, and then exploiting those to the max. And that's why we had such a disaster yesterday.
Chris, what about the reaction of the other Arab states? King Abdullah of Jordan has been on the air today saying that he condemned those small-scale celebrations in Palestine on the West Bank by the young Palestinians that upset so many Americans. But the rest of the Arab world, by and large, has been reasonably muted during all of this.
Well, I think that you have to look at differences of opinion in the Arab world. A lot of Arabs resent American support for Israel. There's no doubt about that. But they also love America, and they love Americans. I think that a lot of the initial reaction was a reaction to the striking against the symbols of American power. But I think very quickly most Arabs, the vast majority of Arabs, decided that they really could not bear the idea of so many people being killed, so many innocents being killed. I think the reaction is going to be more and more emotional and more pro-American, in fact, in the Arab world.
All right, thank you very much, Chris Dickey, who is the regional editor in the Middle East for Newsweek magazine. Thanks for sharing that with us, and we'll probably be talking to you again during the course of the next several days or so. Let's go back up to Boston now, and Dateline's Chris Hansen, who is there. There are any number of reports of some arrest or something going on in that city as law enforcement officers fan out across Boston, the home of Logan Airport, which was where two of those airliners were hijacked shortly after takeoff yesterday. Chris?
Well, as you probably know, Tom, there are a lot of connections in this area to Osama bin Laden. As we mentioned before, investigators believe that there is a true terrorist cell here with connections. But there are also just a lot of other people in the community that the investigators want to talk to see if they have any knowledge of what was going on here. These things are never carried out by a handful of people. It takes a lot of people to get something like this off the ground. And I'll give you an example of some of the things that they're pursuing today. There are a number of cab drivers who investigators think have knowledge of perhaps what was going to take place here, as well as a number of potential airport employees. And one of the questions here is that apparently there was there were a number of airport identification badges missing, perhaps as many as 800 over the last year. Investigators want to know what happened to these, who used them, and if that played any role into the tragic occurrence that we saw yesterday.
And Chris, there's that one intriguing report as well that when two of the men who are believed to have been part of this hijacking gang arrived at Logan Airport, they got into an argument with someone in the parking lot, and that man later called authorities when he heard two of the planes had been hijacked. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I sure do, Tom, and it's interesting because it seems like any time we get involved in one of these terrorist investigations, one of the key elements of the investigation here is a vehicle. We've seen it over and over again, and again, that's what got investigators going here. There was a guy who got in a scuffle with two men whom he simply described as being of Arabic background. He got on the plane, didn't think anything more of it. He got to his destination, and like all of us yesterday, he looked up at the television monitor and said, "Oh my God," and he heard that these planes came from Boston. He called authorities here and said, "Look, I got into it with these guys. This is the car. This is where it parked." They went there. That's where they found these flight manuals in Arabic. They traced that car to these two men, and were able to pretty much figure out that they were key players in this terrorist attack.
All right, Chris Hansen at Logan Airport in Boston for us. Let's go back to Pete Williams now, our Justice Department correspondent. Pete?
Well, Tom, a couple of things. First of all, just to follow up on what Chris Hansen said, federal law enforcement officials say the discovery of that car, the follow-up on evidence that was in it, they say, quote, looks very promising. So obviously, that is the biggest break so far in this case. They also tell us, and this may seem obvious at this point, but it just has to be said, that what is happening at that hotel in Boston is definitely related to the terrorism investigation. So it's certainly that we're watching. Now, in terms of why they're there, officials caution us that they're going to be doing this a lot in the coming days, serving what are called material witness warrants, which are used when you have reason to want to hold someone for questioning. You don't want them to flee. You have reason to believe that they have information that would be useful to investigators, but you don't have evidence that they were involved in the crime. That, they tell us, is what we're going to be seeing a lot of in the next few days, as indeed we saw right before the millennium last time when there were reports of terrorism plots all over the U.S., these material witnesses warrants being served by the dozens around the U.S., and I'm sure we'll be seeing that in the next few days, Tom.
All right, Pete Williams, we'll let you go back to working the phones at the Justice Department and your law enforcement contacts as this investigation goes on. There have been some, I think, fair to say that there have been some ugly incidents developing around this country directed at Arab Americans. Mosques have been defaced. We're told that online chat rooms now have condemned all Arabs. We have to remind everyone that there are more than 7 million Arab Americans in this country of Islamic faith, and they are not terrorists. These are people of strong faith who are law-abiding American citizens, and in fact, in the Middle East and many of those Arab nations that we have been talking about, there are moderate leaders, including King Abdullah today of Jordan, who condemned this attack and condemned those small celebrations that took place on the West Bank yesterday. I'm joined now by former Secretary of State James Baker, Mr. Baker, we are talking about the place of moderate Arabs in American life, not just those who live here, but those in the Middle East as well. You're very familiar with that part of the world. That's going to be a tricky piece for America in the coming days.
Yes, it is, Tom. I think it's always important to remember when we talk about Islamic fundamentalism that there are an awful lot of fundamentalist Muslims who are very, very good friends of the United States, many of them American citizens, but also citizens of other friendly countries like Saudi Arabia and Jordan and the Gulf countries and other countries. So when we condemn fundamentalists, we really should make it clear we're talking only about radical Islamic fundamentalists.
You have served in the White House as Secretary of State and as Treasury Secretary during times of great crises. When as it now appears, this death toll begins to go very, very high, no question there will be a real sense of rage in this country. That, too, will require some very skillful political leadership across party lines in Washington and across America.
I think that all Americans are really going to unite behind the president. We've already seen that. There's not going to be any political partisanship at a time like this, and I really believe that there's going to be great sentiment on the part of the large majority of the American people to hit back and to do so as effectively as possible. And in that regard, Tom, I might say that when the first President Bush decided he was going to eject Iraq from Kuwait, we were successful in bringing the international community together behind that effort. We had Arab states, indeed, that were members of the international coalition. Most Arab states today, even some that in the past have sponsored state terrorism, have condemned this action and expressed a sense of condolence. And I really hope and believe that we will give some thought to building an international coalition to deal with this problem, because this was more than an assault on America. This was an assault on freedom-loving peoples everywhere, and it is something that I think we might be successful in building a coalition to defeat, first through economic and political sanctions, then perhaps through military means once we've pinpointed responsibility.
What is the instrument for doing that? Does the United States lead that with its NATO partners and other partners as they pick them up?
No, I think that the instrument for doing that, as it was in the Gulf War, would be the United States' superior military technology and ability. It's not going to be easy. You don't want to just blow holes in the desert. That's been one of the frustrations in the past dealing with terrorists. When U.S. citizens were taken hostage in Lebanon and we were in office, we never had many good choices, because yes, we could hit them with missiles or airstrikes and that sort of thing, but by the time you do that, the terrorist action's taken place, the terrorists have fled, and you're just blowing holes in the desert. That's not a very good idea. I was very pleased to hear last night when President Bush said, we're not only going to hold responsible the people who actually did this and organized it, we're going to hold responsible those countries and peoples who harbor those people. And to my way of thinking, it wouldn't be a bad idea if indeed it turns out that Osama bin Laden was behind this, it wouldn't be a bad idea, in my view, to pick up the phone and call Kabul and say, okay, we want him in 48 hours, we want him a week, or whatever time period you put on it. That was successful. We set a deadline in the Gulf War. It worked. I would think we might want to give some consideration to doing the same thing today.
All right. Thank you very much, former Secretary of State James Baker, who has been a wise counsel to a number of presidents with a very thoughtful and at the same time provocative suggestion that we simply pick up the phone, call Kabul and say we want Osama bin Laden, if he is identified as the ringleader and mastermind behind all this, in 48 hours or else, because as the president warned, any country that harbored these terrorists would suffer punishment as well. One of our staffers at CNBC in Singapore dialed the foreign ministry in Kabul not so long ago, just today, and was told by a spokesperson there, yes, Osama bin Laden is in Afghanistan. That spokesperson saying, I have seen him. When and where, we cannot say, of course. NBC's Rahima Ellis is in lower Manhattan, as she was all day yesterday and at Ground Zero last night. Rahima, the news does not get much better from there.
No, Tom, indeed it does not, but the hope continues here. I'm in an area right now, and from this point down, the effort here is focused on recovery and saving lives. Ironically, some of the rescuers have been in need of being rescued themselves. Hundreds of them, we are told, firefighters fear that hundreds of their own may be trapped inside the tangled debris because those firefighters were in the area when some parts of the World Trade Center came crashing down. And in the midst of what seems like and looks like an impossible task, there have been reasons to hope. 2 Port Authority workers were pulled from the rubble last night alive, and early this morning, 5 firefighters were pulled from the debris and 1 was conscious. We don't know the conditions of those men at this hour. Hundreds of firefighters are literally working around the clock. I've been here all night long and watched them as they came through the area. Listen to what one firefighter from Staten Island told me about why he is here.
Did you want to come? Oh, of course, everybody does. Just to help. Civilians in there, volunteers, a lot of people helping. Everybody's doing their part. We're going to need everybody because it's going to take a long time.
They are literally working around the clock. And I said to some of these rescue workers, how is it that you keep going? They said they are fatigued, but they are running on adrenaline. I also asked them, how can you prepare for something like this? One firefighter said to me, there's no way to prepare for it. You just come to this area and do the best that you can. Again, literally hundreds of firefighters from as far away as Rhode Island and across to Pennsylvania and everywhere in between have come here with a commitment to see this task through to the end. Although, as many of them have said to me, they have no idea, Tom, as to when they'll be going home.
All right, Rahima Ellis in Lower Manhattan, where the search and rescue effort continues, people volunteering. They're having a hard time getting a lot of those firemen and emergency rescue workers, in fact, to go off shift to get some rest and to get some food and to come back at another time. This will be going on not just for the next 24 hours, but for the next several days. We're joined now by General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was the commander of the Allied forces in Operation Desert Storm. We just heard your old colleague, James Baker, the former Secretary of State, say that what we ought to do, if it is in fact Osama bin Laden, is pick up the phone, call Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, say to the Taliban officials, we want him in 48 hours or else. Think that's a good idea?
Not a bad idea if we know he's there. That's the secret. We've got to know he's there before we can do something like that. What I thought was very important, what Jim Baker said, though, was about our other friends in the area. I've got to tell you that I knew Prince Abdullah very, very well, and I consider him a very good friend of our country. I worked with the Pakistanis a great deal during the time of the Afghan resistance against the Soviet Union. And I will tell you, I have some very, very dear friends in the United Arab Emirates, beginning with Sheikh Zayed and his son, Prince Mohammed, who are truly good friends of ours. So we have to be very careful that we just don't condemn every Arab or condemn everyone who practices Islam. That's really an important thing.
General Schwarzkopf, I think a lot of Americans are puzzled why they don't hear more support from the United States from, for example, Kuwait, which was liberated by the United States, or from our friends in Saudi Arabia, which had its fanny saved by the United States during Operation Desert Storm, or from some of the other moderate Arab states that, in fact, have relied on American military aid and economic aid, for that matter, principally including Egypt.
Well, many of those countries are on very shaky legs. They are walking that tightrope between supporting Islam, supporting their religion, which of course they will always do. Got to remember, the king of Saudi Arabia calls himself the keeper of the 2 holy mosques of Mecca and Medina. He doesn't call himself the king. And also the fact that many of these countries have indirectly financed all of the operations against Israel. Even when they are violently pro-American, they are also violently anti-Israel. And they have to be very careful and walk this tight line because there are elements, such as Osama bin Laden, who has announced that all of these regimes were corrupt and he wants to overthrow all of them. It's not a cut and dried black and white world over there. It's very, very murky.
We don't want to get into the blame game during this time of a national crisis, but were you surprised when the new Bush administration didn't get more directly involved in what was going on in the Middle East as the escalation of violence played out on television screens here and in the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and the other West Bank villages in that part of the world?
Yeah, I'm really not qualified to answer that, Tom, because I can't give you exactly how much they were involved and how much they weren't involved. There's no question about the fact that the United States is going to have to play a major role if we're ever going to see peace in the Middle East between the Arabs and the Israelis. On the other hand, there's no cut and dried, simple answer. As you know, it's a very, very, very tedious business that at any time, the plate can fall off the table.
All right, thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf, who's been with us during the past 24 hours and will be with us throughout the rest of this day as well. Baseball, Major League Baseball has postponed for the third straight day. That's the first time that 2 complete days in a row have been postponed in the Major League Baseball schedule since World War I in 1918. This obviously will have an effect on the season as well, but this country is on hold, understandably, until we can figure out how many people can be saved in Lower Manhattan, how many people have been killed there, what the political and military response to all of this will be, and certainly what the situation is at the Pentagon. This is a wounded nation, and it's still in the process of healing. All other business in this country, both retail, commercial business, the business of leisure and entertainment, all have been put on hold as people focus on their own lives and grieve with the families who have loved ones trapped in the rubble that you see before you there. Let's go to NBC's Robert Hager now, who's keeping track of the aviation situation for us. Robert, there was some talk about lifting the ban on takeoffs at noon today, but that's been delayed some, I gather.
It has, and all the major airlines, well, most of them are now saying that they won't fly until after 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time at the first. So that includes United Airlines, Delta, U.S. Air, Alaska. They won't fly until after 6 p.m. Pacific time. Continental has said it will fly only minimally today, even tonight. Minimally meaning probably just those flights that were suspended yesterday where passengers were in mid-flight at some connecting point, and they go on and take them to the destination. Northwest has said that it won't fly at all today. Southwest has said that it won't fly at all today either. My hunch is that some of these airlines that have said they'd try after 6 p.m., that in the end they won't fly even this evening. TWA says it's grounded indefinitely. Midway, which already was in financial trouble, flying under Chapter 11, essentially went out of business today. They said they're going to close down more or less permanently because they fear that passengers will be afraid to fly from now on and that all the airlines will take an economic hit. We can tell you something about restrictions at the airport, some of this new security that people have been talking about. Planes carrying mail, so they're the principal carrier of mail in this country. They're not going to be allowed to take mail in passenger planes for at least another 48 hours is what we understand now. So the post office is going to have to weigh in with more mail trucks for the time being. There will be increased screening, as we've heard, of passengers and carry-on luggage in particular. There'll be no curbside baggage. Sale of knife-like objects is now being banned at airports, and I think one version I heard of this is even plastic knives at airport concessions are being banned. And if you can believe it, knives were not part of the absolutely don't allow through screening list before. Well, now they are. No knives or knife-like objects are going to be permitted through screening. That means that passengers will not be able to carry them on airliners from now on. Tom?
Much NBC's Robert Hager. That has always been, I thought, an uneven part of airport security, Bob. I have in one of my kit bags a Swiss Army knife, as a lot of people do. Sometimes it goes through, sometimes it does not. When I'm in Europe or traveling in the Middle East, it always gets picked up and it's handed off to one of the flight attendants, and I get it back at the end of the flight. But in this country, it just really does depend on the airport. But as you say, there will be a big crackdown on all of that.
Tom, if you're with me,
yes, go ahead.
I had a thought about on the investigative side on the cockpit voice recorders, because we said previously that should provide important clues as to what went on in the cockpit. But there are two possibilities there. One being that if these people were sophisticated enough to fly the plane, if they didn't want to leave a footprint of who they were, that's a fairly easy off switch there, to hit the cockpit recorder button and turn it off. People have done that before. It came up with Silky there in Indonesia where the pilot, we believe, committed suicide, and he made sure to cut off the cockpit voice recorder before he did it. One other thing, I'm not sure if they find a cockpit voice recorder that we'll hear about it immediately. When the NTSB finds one in a normal case, they tell us about it right away. But this is all under the jurisdiction of FBI and criminal agencies at this point, and if they find the cockpit voice recorder, that would be a valuable find and a valuable potential piece of evidence if it wasn't turned off, and I'm not sure they'd tell us right away.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Robert Hager. The search for the cockpit voice recorder and the rubble of the Twin Trade Towers at the World Trade Center here in New York is going to be a critical part of that search and rescue effort. They're trying to find people who may be alive, first of all, trying to recover the dead. But Robert Bazell and others who have been down there say it's just stunning to see how small the pieces of debris are when you realize that these were two 110-story buildings that completely collapsed in what amounted to a junk pile of concrete, steel, glass, and electrical circuitry. Let's go to NBC's George Lewis now, who is in Los Angeles at Los Angeles International Airport. That was the destination of 3 of the 4 flights that were hijacked yesterday. It's a ghost town today. George?
Yeah, Tom, it is a ghost town. There's nothing taking off or landing here. There are maintenance trucks going up and down. It looks like some of the aircraft here, some of the 178 aircraft that are on the ground here are being maintained perhaps in preparation for eventually resuming normal operations. But the people here at LAX tell us that they don't know when things will get back to normal. As Bob Hager reported, there are going to be all sorts of new security restrictions. The people here at LAX confirm that it may be a situation where people are not permitted to check bags at the curbside. There may be new parking restrictions. You may see canine units, dogs sniffing luggage throughout the airport, all sorts of police presence that wasn't there before. So, as you said, all of the flights, all of the hijacked flights were headed for California. So all of the horrendous events back east have enormous implications here.
Shocked and grieving, the relatives of the airline passengers were quickly escorted to a private area at LA International and later to 2 nearby hotels. Among the passengers bound for Los Angeles, David Angel, the producer of the TV series Frasier, and lawyer and TV commentator Barbara Olson, wife of U.S. Solicitor General Ted Olson. Before her plane crashed into the Pentagon, Olson reportedly called her husband twice on a mobile phone to tell him the jetliner was being hijacked by men with knives, that the crew and all the passengers were being forced to the back of the aircraft. On United Airlines 93, the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania, Tom Burnett, vice president of a medical devices company in Northern California, called his wife and indicated he and other passengers were trying to overcome the hijackers. Father Frank Colachico, a friend of the family.
Yeah, he called on the cell phone and told her that one of the passengers was already dead and that they knew that they were all going to die, and that 2 other men and he were going to try to do something, the conversation, and love you, honey, and that was the end of the conversation.
On the same plane, Mark Bingham called his mother and his aunt.
He just said, I want to let you all know that I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again.
He said that?
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
I hope it was quick. I hope he took an active part in thwarting the hijackers.
Last night in Los Angeles, friends of 2 other hijacking victims attended a special church service, turning to their faith to ease the pain of the loss.
Family members who are related to the people who were on the 3 LA-bound planes have been taken to 2 hotels near the airport, one operated by American Airlines, the other for the United Airlines people. They're meeting with airline personnel and grief counselors at this hour, hoping to hear any details of their loved ones. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC's George Lewis at Los Angeles International Airport. That intriguing report that there was a cell phone call made from one of the passengers on board the plane that they were going to try to take action against the hijackers. That may have caused that plane to crash outside of Pittsburgh. It was turned around and headed for the eastern seaboard. We can only presume that it was headed back toward Washington, D.C. The plane that had taken off from Dulles crashed into the Pentagon. You'll recall the flight, this one was from Newark to San Francisco, got out over Pennsylvania before it made a very sharp U-turn in the sky, but then it went down before it could reach the nation's capital. Grief counselors have been working with the families of the people who were on board those 4 airliners. Obviously, yesterday, grief counselors are at work. Therapists are being called to hospitals here in Manhattan. And then thousands of people who were in the vicinity yesterday are having to deal with the grief on their own. One of them is Clifton Cloud, who was in the immediate vicinity of the World Trade Center when the airplane struck and when the Twin Towers came down, and he joins us now. Mr. Cloud, why don't you briefly recap for us where you were and what you saw?
I was on the roof of a parking garage right in my neighborhood on Essex Street, and I saw the gaping hole in the first tower, and I ran home to get my video camera because I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And when I was videotaping the building, all of a sudden I saw this massive explosion and this white flash of light, which the camera didn't pick up. Seconds later, I felt the blast and just instantly realized how many people were involved and the human face on the tragedy of that building going down. It was much more than I expected to see yesterday.
Did you have friends who worked in either of those buildings?
Yes, the company I work for, ACE, we have a lot of clients. Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter. You know, I've been in that building. I've climbed in the ceilings. We have crews in there all the time. As a matter of fact, I called our company right away because I knew we probably had people on their way to that building or in the building to get them on the radio to tell them to get out, because this was obviously more than just an accident of an airplane that everyone thought at first. And I tried to call them, I called my wife, and it was shocking. It was a real tragedy. And when you're in that building and you know how high the floors are and you see helicopters flying around and you realize that those flames were 10 and 20 stories high and deep into the building, you know that, that there was tremendous loss of life and a lot of wonderful, good people.
Mr. Cloud, as you and I continue to talk, I'm going to ask our control room to find that remarkable piece of New York City Fire Department videotape and run it in slow motion. That was the first airplane that went into the World Trade Center Tower number 1. And as they get that prepared, let me just ask you about what kind of a night you had last night.
Last night, my wife and my son, we brought his crib into our bedroom. We honestly didn't know what to expect. You know, when you live in New York, especially in the last 6 years or so, you see people committed. I saw firemen running with their gear to try to get downtown, and I felt like we were in good hands, but there was no telling what would happen. So my son and my wife and I, we all slept in the same room. We brought his crib in, and this morning when I woke up, I was glad that everything was still okay. And I personally thank, you know, all of the people that are down there, you know, that are working for all of us, you know, for all of our benefits.
Maybe you can share with the rest of the country the spirit of New York. It's got a tough guy reputation, but a pretty tender heart, doesn't it?
You know, New York, if you live in New York, you know, there's struggles, daily struggles, but everyone that lives here loves the city. I just flew back from Arkansas, and whenever I fly, I always get a window seat, because if there's a chance of me seeing the skyline, I want to see it every time. And there was actually a gentleman in the aisle seat next to me who kind of said, "Excuse me, could I see the view also?" And he was another New Yorker. No matter how long you live here, you love that skyline. You love the icon of the World Trade Center, but also you deeply know inside that icon represents people. It represents some of the hardest working people who've climbed up, that have taken they've taken their hits. They've worked hard to get here. They commute. They work, whether they're cleaning the building or making incredible large decisions, you know, involving many people. They work hard at what they do, and they care deeply about what they do. And you know, New York City has been home from everyone from George Washington to Al Sharpton, and I think that, you know, our diversity is what makes us strong, and nobody is going to knock us out. And I thought also, when I saw the pictures of the people jumping out of the building, you know, maybe 20 terrorists died, maybe 20 terrorists committed suicide into the buildings, but a lot more New Yorkers jumped rather than be burned alive, because, you know, New Yorkers are always, and as Americans, I believe, are always doing what they can.
Mr. Cloud, thank you very much for being with us, and give your child a hug for us as well, and we hope that your life gets back to normal before too long.
Thank you very much.
Clifton Cloud, who was in the vicinity of the World Trade Center yesterday with his home video camera when all that carnage occurred, and it...
You're watching the latest developments in the attacks on America from NBC News. Julie Francavilla here with Mark Mullen. We want to update you on this local side of this tragic story.
Especially what is going on at SeaTac Airport right now and what is not going on at SeaTac Airport. More and more, Gary Chittum, who joins us live now at the airport, it is shaping up to be another day with canceled flights.
Well, Mark and Julie, how many times have I stood before you and said now they have moved back the time that they expect to resume operations here? We had heard last night that it would start at 9 a.m. Pacific time today. They moved that back to 11, and then they moved it back to 3 a.m.